Someone left a comment in one of my videos saying that with all the surveillance talk in my videos, how come some criminals manage to escape identification and capture? Let's do a case study so we understand the difference between a criminal who understands some basic ways to elude law enforcement versus an average person who thinks they have nothing to hide. If you've been following the news, you know of the event on November 13, 2022, when a killer stabbed 4 students in a rental home in Moscow, Idaho. 6 weeks later, the suspect, Brian Koberger, was arrested and was charged with murder in that case. There are things to learn here because, of course, Brian Koberger had a phone, and it would be interesting to know exactly how the phone was used to connect him to the murders. There was also DNA evidence, and we can discuss how this was possibly used to identify the suspect. Also, here we have a case of a suspect who is aware of law enforcement techniques because he himself was a criminology PhD student. Here, even with someone who had some understanding of police investigation methods, there was still a way to discover his identity. I'm not discussing this to help anyone become a criminal. The purpose of this teaching moment is to make you all aware of the kind of data being collected and how it can be used to track you or even incriminate you because your data happens to coincide with an event like this murder. It also gets interesting because we can be identified by behaviors that are indirect. Stay right there for this unique learning opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, Brian Koberger had a phone, and as would be expected, law enforcement did request the location data of the phone from various sources and used that to validate that they had the correct suspect or to even narrow down suspects. Let me explain a few details about phone tracking. Now, I've explained this to all of you many times in past videos. Your phone locations are always tracked if you have a standard normie phone. Normie phones are Google Androids and iPhones. Some of you think that tracking only occurs if you give the phone permissions. But I've stated to you that location tracking is permissionless when it comes to Apple, Google, and the carrier. There's no way to stop this tracking if you have a phone or if you have their phones. If you have an iPhone, it's even worse. Your iPhone turns into an AirTag when it is off. So there is not even the possibility of hiding anything even if you turn the device off. Now, I have no idea what kind of phone Brian Koberger has, and since trial hasn't started, we don't know all the details yet on the evidence. But we will speculate based on the news. From what I can gather, it appears that Koberger's phone was not directly connected to the Idaho apartment where the murder occurred. Of course, Koberger is a student of criminology and will have known the specific investigation techniques. But this shows that Koberger would not have worked in an intelligence agency. Apparently, it was found that the phone was turned off during the time of the murders, which was early in the morning, so that's even stranger right there. Here we have the reverse problem. Normally, the absence of data is exculpatory. In this instance, why turn your phone off just in time for a murder to be committed, especially at a weird hour? Given that they know the phone was off, then I would guess that it is not an iPhone, since that can be tracked with a precise location even if the phone is off. Location data can come from several sources. Let me explain this. All phones with a SIM card connect regularly to a carrier tower. The phone itself initiates this connection by sending out a query and then broadcasts what is called a K1 identifier. This identifier is in the SIM card, and the carrier can compare the K1 identifier to a matching IMSI or International Mobile Subscriber Identity. This tells you a couple of things. The IMSI verifies that the phone is validated on the carrier network. The SIM card itself identifies the carrier. So a signal will not be sent to AT&T if the SIM card is T-Mobile. Next thing to note is that the tower is always known, since at any moment the device talks to a specific tower. So at the very least, the phone will identify one tower location. Now the signal to connect can also be captured by other nearby towers. Thus, there will be attempts recorded with other towers, though the final connection is made with the strongest tower signal. The point here is that multiple towers means tower triangulation. Your position can be narrowed down instead of the fairly large area identified by a single tower. Now this is a guess, but I'm going to say that tower triangulation might reveal an area within a quarter of a mile. Law enforcement would get this data from the carrier. All they need to do is provide the IMSI of the user, and they can get that from the phone number associated with Koberger in this instance. The next source of data is Google. Now, this is more unrefined. All phones initiate GPS reception by first contacting Google, even if it's an iPhone. Why Google? Because Google holds the patent for this. This feature is called Supple, S-U-P-L. Basically, all phones connect to supple.google.com. And what it sends to Google is a basic location based on single tower triangulation. This is built into the GPS chips in all phones, and I presume manufactured by Broadcom. Without Supple, phones would take a couple of minutes to initiate a GPS connection. This makes it faster by telling the phone which satellites to track based on the current rough location instead of manually searching for all satellites. Now this is interesting because Supple could work without a SIM card or even any carrier. Supple could be sent to get a location via Wi-Fi. I would imagine this would be a last resort though, as a source of evidence, because single tower triangulation would just give a very rough location, maybe 1 mile from the tower at best. The best location tracking is provided by Google and Apple. Google even gave a name for the database it has that has all the locations of all users. It is called the Google Sensor Vault. It is a high probability that since the Idaho murder case was not an iPhone, we think, then this is the best source of accurate location data. Again, I'm guessing it's not an iPhone, or the location data would be revealed even if the phone were off. Unless Koberger put the phone in a Faraday bag instead of turning it off. Google location data is very precise, much more precise than carrier triangulation, typically with an accuracy of 6 feet, and this works indoors. It uses not just GPS but Wi-Fi routers in the area to triangulate a position. This is called Wi-Fi triangulation. Apple has the same kind of technology but adds the AirTag tech to enhance location tracking. In other words, you are additionally tracked based on which AirTags are near you. There are many court cases where the Google Sensor Vault was used. In fact, 940 plus people have been charged in the January 6th Capitol riot based on Google Sensor Vault data. I imagine that all these people had normie phones. Now that the location tracking is made more obvious, let's think about this a moment. In the intelligence community, tracking is not just based on when the phones are on and emitting location information. It is also about behavioral data when they are off. Couple of examples. 2 people, perhaps intelligence agents, both turn their phones off at the same time. Suspicious? Are they meeting secretly? This can also be applied to whistleblowers. Or the opposite case, exculpatory evidence because the phones were on and were elsewhere. Or let's generate a hypothetical case. In order to hide, someone gives the phone to someone else to carry. But here's a case where 2 phones have identical locations at all times. How about a better case? Someone has the Google phone, which does not send location to the Google Sensor Vault. Here, there's never a location, so there is no way to spot the sudden behavioral shift. Although it raises the point that the absence of tracking data would eliminate exculpatory evidence. Anyway, an interesting point. In Brian Koberger's case, he knew enough to turn his phone off during the murder, if he's the murderer. But he didn't think of the issues I just brought up here, which are behavioral issues, inconsistency in behavior. Also, the phone was spotted in the area at other times before the murder. I don't know how close or if he chose to turn it off intermittently then as well. Apparently, one of the other pieces of evidence was a knife sheath that was left at the murder location. And this knife sheath apparently had DNA on it and it matched Kohberger. I presume this is the stronger piece of evidence and the phone information just supports it. But it's interesting how the DNA was used to find Kohberger, and we should all be aware of this. There are now nationally collected DNA from DNA sites like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe. And in case you didn't know, 23andMe was founded by the wife of Sergey Brin of Google, and Google still has investment in 23andMe. So this is a problem I've mentioned in relation to contact lists. The problem isn't necessarily yourself. You may try to protect your privacy, but it is the others you have to worry about. If some cousin of yours decides to get a DNA test from these companies, then someone could cross-check some DNA that is found from a source and then find out the relatives. Then conducting a simple investigation would reveal other relatives. What I'm describing here is a general problem, relating even to collecting any kind of biometric for any purpose in the world. Now in this case, the Idaho murderer supposedly had his car spotted in the area where the apartments were. So a white car similar to the car driven by Kohberger. And that was in fact spotted by cameras. And this would be worse if this were a big city like Los Angeles. Los Angeles has a very extensive tracking system. There are license plate readers, especially on freeways. There are cameras on many intersections, and tickets can now be given based on the red license plate and facial recognition of the driver. So in certain parts of town, there would be no escape from having a record that a certain vehicle was seen. This is on top of all the phone location tracking that could have occurred. In addition, the Ring cameras installed in many homes are now remote viewing devices for Amazon and the government. The Ring camera data is centrally kept on Amazon for surveillance access. While some of you may think this makes you feel safer that this kind of surveillance goes on, this could also have a reverse effect. You could have innocently entered an area and just by luck be accused of a crime. This has happened multiple times. In fact, there have been cases where the location data was used to falsely charge someone with a crime, and that was the only evidence. This is why there is a Fourth Amendment to protect against the abuse of a dragnet based on mass surveillance data. There are more things that can be surveilled. Every post you make on the internet, every search will be associated with you and can be used either in an exculpatory way or as evidence. But I worry about a new possibility that the Brian Kohberger case revealed. Like I said, he turned off his phone at the time of the murders. Here, the absence of data was used against him. This is what bothers me. Some of us have less data. I use a Google phone, so I don't emit data for the Google Sensor Vault. Neither do I use an iPhone, so I have no data for the Apple equivalent database. I use a VPN always, and my IP address is not in the reverse IP lookup databases. I'm very protective of what I put in social media. I do not use Zucking Zuckbook and all the other meta platforms. I'm fully aware of how I use email with the expectation that someone can always read them. So, will the absence of data put us in a suspect list? This is something deep to think about and maybe suggest that we could have another persona with some limited activity just so we don't stand out. This is one of the reasons I don't like to advertise being pro-privacy in an obvious way by using Proton Mail with your metadata on it. Better to be more low-key, in my opinion. Which is hard for me, by the way, because I'm a public figure. And maybe some controlled social media presence somewhere, perhaps protected by VPN and anti-location tracking measures, might be needed. Hopefully this discussion helps you relate these observations to your life as a privacy-respecting citizen. Not sure I can give you all the answer, but it is meant to raise questions and awareness. Folks, my company creates products that are intended to protect our privacy. We provide phones that have no centralized control and are invisible to big tech. Our most popular device is the Brax 2 phone, running Brax OS. We also have Pixel phones that have Google removed. They are called de-Googled phones. We have a VPN service, Bytes VPN, which is a stealth VPN in that it doesn't scream that you're on a VPN. We do not put thousands of you on a single server. We have Braxmail, which gives you many domains for privacy and eliminates the metadata from your emails. This means no IP addresses and traces on your email that show where it came from. All these products are on the store on my app, BraxMe. Come visit us there. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching and see you again soon.